Speaking of that, I want to take this opportunity to thank James McAnally and the Luminary staff for providing the space for this to take place. I want to thank Jessica, Baran, and Liz Wolfson, as well as James, for bringing their hearts and minds to this conversation. So I appreciate that. We're going to forego a facilitator this time. And so what I'm going to do is just introduce the panelists, and they're going to launch into some questions. And we're just going to kind of let them go from there. Towards the end, we'll be taking questions from you all if you have any of those. So starting the far end there, this is Jessica Baran. Jessica is a poet, curator, critic, and associate director of curatorial and program development at Baran Projects and Projects Plus Gallery. She's the author of 3 poetry collections. She's a former art writer for Riverfront Times, the assistant director of White Flag Projects, and director of Fort Gondo Compound Museums. She also lectures intermittently at the San Fox School of Design and Visual Art and St. Louis University's Prison Arts and Education program. She holds a BA in Visual Art from Columbia University of New York and an MFA in poetry from WashU in St. Louis, where she lives with poet Daniel Farrell and her dog Vinny. That's great. Elizabeth Wolfson is a writer, curator, and co-director of Floodplain, a nonprofit artist-run art space in the Gravel Park neighborhood aimed at providing an arena for artists to pursue experimental projects. Liz worked in various nonprofits, including White Flag Projects and Slam. Her writing has appeared in such publications as St. Louis Magazine and Art 21. Presently, Liz is completing her PhD in American Studies and working with her co-directors to curate, organize, and promote art both locally and nationally. And then finally, this guy named here is James McAnally. He's a co-founder and caretaker of the Luminary, and also co-founder and editor of Contemporary Art Review, an international platform for contemporary art criticism that focuses on artist-run and alternative spaces. In his artistic practice, he works as part of the collaborative U.S. English, as a founding member of the artist-owned collaborative Monaco. McAnally is a recent recipient of the Creative Capital Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writer Grant for short-form writing. His writings appeared in Art Journal, Art in America, Terra, Hyperallergic, and the Contemporary Arts Review, and is in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, amongst others. So I'm just going to hand it over to Liz to start off, I think, and let's give him a hand.
We are starting with the topic of Tastemakers. So I suppose the individuals who drive the making of taste. And so the first question that we have on our list is, what are the motivations to think / write / curate art? What are the parents? I guess in the spirit of the 5 questions, maybe we can ask why we do this to ourselves. Yeah. I don't know who should begin. Anyone, please go.
You asked questions, I guess that leaves me. I think that it starts generally for myself and for most people I know, with a kind of compulsion or an interest to be a part of certain conversations that tend to happen in the arts that don't happen otherwise. So you kind of find yourself in this space and navigating it. And I think for everyone that's a subjective experience of kind of backing into this space of curating or organizing or working with especially, I think, those paths as opposed to being an artist, you kind of end up there through a series of decisions and find that there's maybe like latitude that you don't see in other parts of the world of organizing and thinking. And then I think from there, it becomes a really like communal activity. It's about the people that you work with and the like interactions that happen through that. I think for me, that's the carrot. There's certainly not like a professional carrot or financial carrot or like other sort of external motivations. And we'll get to Canons later, but like there's definitely not that sense of like being a part of some historic narrative. It's really about the like really intimate, close conversations that feel essential and continue to feel essential. It's just like a linkage of those over time, and the way you navigate through those, I think, is the motivation.
Do you think that's accurate? No, I definitely think that's accurate. I mean, in collecting my thoughts on the way here tonight, I was thinking about this question of taste, which we're talking about people who make taste, but I think it starts with taste itself, which is an interesting topic because taste sits at the boundary between, you know, the personal and the collective, the personal and the public. And, you know, I think we have, you know, on the one hand, this idea that our taste is like, you know, very personal, very individualistic, reflection of who we are as individuals, and maybe as curators, you know, we have some sense of like our curatorial vision. I mean, I think you have to, right, to like do this work. But on the other hand, it's like taste is, like that's kind of a fallacy, right? I mean, like, even the most sort of like groundbreaking, like curators or collectors, you know, the big names that we know who sort of broke the careers of very famous artists, like, you know, who are sort of profiled as having, you know, really like visionary taste, right? It's like, well, was it really, you know, like maybe in some ways, yes, but also like probably not, right? Because it's like it's always public, it's always collective, and taste is always about power. Taste is incredibly political. So I guess, I don't know, that's not like a really like nice sort of like follow-up to what you just said. That's a good point.
I think taste is power. It's like we're kind of creating an outline. So basically, you did the numeral. Now we're doing a rep-y.
Right.
No, so I think the B would be also how the various institutions we kind of occupy or work within then create a sense of boundaries to what this sort of obviously like unlimited sense of subjective taste could be. But hopefully what we're doing is looking around the institution itself is identifying that this is a gap in this particular community, and this is what the curatorial vision should be within that institution. So it's like these are sort of subsectors of what we're saying. So then our mission within that institution is to fulfill whatever that ideology is within that given space. And maybe us personally don't necessarily, I think that's actually a kind of beautiful that you kind of sort of set aside whatever your taste may be, actually. It's a good move from that notion of the curator is just some sort of, I don't know, I almost think of it like it's like a creative looking this monster just sort of like, right. This is so good. We're trying to put some caps on that, so that there's some sense of us thinking through actually like a problem to solve, which is this institution does that, so how do you curate successfully within that rubric? This institution does that, so I'm successfully curating within that, and then blah, 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 and then within the whole network, we're hopefully creating a rounded out community of voices. I'd like to think that that's ultimately what's happening, which maybe goes against, I think, former narratives about a maybe more kind of like a ingredient, my taste is the best taste.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've always, like, I think that's why for a long time, like when I first started actually like organizing shows, which is actually something I started originally doing collectively, like as an undergrad, you know, putting on shows. I mean, it was a group kind of activity. And so, you know, after like post-graduation, when I came back to that work, and I started doing it on my own, just because I didn't have anyone to do it with, like I didn't like necessarily calling myself a curator because I was like, I don't know about that, you know, it conjures up. So, and exactly as you say, like, you know, so many sort of like potentially negative stereotypes, and I was like, I don't know about that. You know, I wanted to think about myself as organizing, you know, as an organizer. And now I'm a little bit more comfortable with it, and like, yeah, this is like what I'm doing, so I should just like call it that because that's what it is. Sure. You know, I like your point about institutions giving one an opportunity to sort of like put that individual presentation aside to the service of the, like, what is the institution's mission?
Yeah.
I think there's also, if you kind of equate taste and power in that paradigm of the curatorial work, you're also thinking about sharing power. It's like, it's not about seeing the taste realized in the most ideal context or conditions. And that's maybe the like Greenbergian, and I think that that's continued and still continues in lots of places within the arts. And I think that it was a paradigm in St. Louis and thinking about really like local dynamics that really like does not work well here. Like that's sort of like, as you realize this like perfect vision within a like lived community, it tends to not speak for that community very well. I mean, obviously, but when you enter it the way that you're kind of framing the work of a curator, it's really nice in interesting ways. And that's like, that's one output of the curatorial approach. It's not, it's really throwing your voice more than like realizing your voice.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that also is, I think true of the other institutions that we work amidst, but it is kind of like that notion of how form functions. And like you think about like a sonnet, the notion of like a sonnet that's really successful just because it's pushing against the restrictions it's given, as opposed to it being just like totally free verse, which I'm not saying that free verse makes sense, not formal. So this is all coming out wrong, but it's just like it's about the tension of restrictions and a kind of felicity of voice. It actually creates a greater sense of meaning than just sort of free form, you know, first person lyricism.
Yeah, no, I think
we're talking about Bonnie Frank. I don't know what I'm like free form first person lyricism. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Freestyle.
Just saying, something like that. The tension is more productive than the lack of tension.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think because it keeps you from getting too comfortable, you know, which I think for this kind of
critic.
And also democratic, for sure. You know, in terms of like, you know, power, models, like that's definitely not the, you know, I think of, especially in our, I mean, it never was, you know, I think an ideal way for our programming to operate, but, you know, in 2018, it's especially like, this is not going to function anymore. Like, this is not going to get us where we want to go as, you know, art loving community, as a broader community, as, you know, a community of neighbors. Like, you know, that model just doesn't, it just like broke down. Like, the wheel fell off.
I agree.
Okay, so let's see. I think we covered the role of curator. Yeah, we covered the role of curator.
Should we intersperse some comments or should we comments here?
Just whatever, how you guys want to do it.
Okay, I feel like it might be good as a conversation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. That might just, yes.
I feel like a lot of critics and curators don't really think about their taste that much. In my experience, they think of what they're doing is driven by what they think is important and informed by various kind of intellectual or social concerns. So do you think about your taste and that informing the choices that you make?
It is a good question, because it's almost like then coming all the way around, right? Like, we're talking about doing our due diligence, and then we've been kind of assigned roles, but then there is a point at which I think it's determining. Oh, so, okay, this is how I see that role, actually. I feel like that becomes actually more of a experiential privilege. I think you have to do your due diligence to a certain extent in order to gain trust within your profession. And then at some point it becomes very clear that, yeah, it is really important that you want to go to certain writers and thinkers because you know they're really excellent in weighing in on that particular subject matter. So I do think that specialization is really valuable. But that's almost beyond taste. It's like a mixture of taste and expertise. Does that make sense? Because taste is almost banking on the idea that it's just what they like. But we're hoping that there's some rigor behind the taste. You know what I mean? Does that make a little bit of sense? But I do agree with that. And I feel like, at least personally, I've only recently begun to feel like I have agency over that, because it was sort of like I had to make a lot of gestures to maybe establish myself, and then now maybe I can choose more selectively what I can weigh in, and that becomes more of a matter of, okay, this is what Jessica's good at talking about. Which honestly, if you know that is, please let me know. But I don't know if that's answering your question. That's kind of how I think about it, at least. And maybe it was always there. Maybe I always did have certain taste winnings, but I may have defaulted to this is important and I want to be talking about. Does that make sense?
Can I add on? I think that's an interesting word to bring up, trust. So thinking about the relationship of like the hierarchy and the mission of the institution, and you being as a representative of that institution, and saying like, oh, I kind of have to prove myself and do certain gestures and certain movements to really show, hey, like this is what I'm doing, and I know what I'm doing. So I think that relationship, you saying that relationship and that level of trust is interesting to think about that in that communication too with the higher powers, or kind of the overall mission of the institution.
I mean, I feel very strongly about trust in terms of critical relationships and curatorial relationships. I mean, I don't know that that's an implicit universal standard. I think there are implied ethos that I'd like to think that I abide by, but they aren't very explicit. I'd like to think that even, for instance, if you're writing for the St. Louis community, that you gain the trust of this community, which I think I can more probably define than I could thinking about my writing or whatever it is that I do on a national level. I have no idea, if friends elsewhere, but it's not like that makes much of a difference in terms of like an objective goal, like, oh, that's where I stand, But I think that is a really big, an issue, and it's hard to define. I think we all kind of internally have a rubric for that, but it's, again, like I said, not publicly explicit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in this work, trust is really, there's trust is key, and it operates on a few different levels. For one thing, when you're working with an artist or artists, that's a very trust-based relationship. I think about that a lot. But then, curating, or at least I think the kind of curatorial work that the three of us do, is a very public-oriented activity. I'm doing it because, of course, I get a level of personal satisfaction from it. I enjoy the process and all these things. But also, I'm hoping to, put art on the walls, that people will connect to and will mean something to people, and to do it in a way that, does the work service and shows it in its best light and is interesting and engaging and all these things. And so that is, and you want the public to respond and to come to the things that you do, because they trust that when they come to your thing, they are going to see something that's worth their time. Because St. Louis is a very exciting city. There's a lot going on here. There are many things you can do on a given night. You don't have to go to an art show. There's also 20 art shows if you just want to go to an art show. Why do you have to go to my art show?
Which brings up the issue of publics too. Who is the public that we think we're gaining trust For sure,
And
for
I
sure.
think it's a tender topic. There's a lot in that.
Oh.
So I completely, I do, there is, so to say that this is about trust is a bit of a deceit. Yeah. But I do, yeah, it's an important trust, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. But I think that, but I think that like that notion of expertise and like authority and like how are you authorized to like open a door and invite the public into your space, that's a big, that's, I think there's a lot there to talk about as well. Yeah.
I mean, to your question, I'm trying to like remember it in some ways. But this idea
This is
of
a long time ago.
yeah, it's just like retracing it. But this idea of like, I think what you're asking is like, in what ways does that public encompass this sort of other sort of art historical public, or like this sort of idea that I think we're talking about in really kind of intimate ways, which I prefer in a lot of ways, but I think that the ideal kind of curatorial stance is when you can really take care of your publics in all of their facets, including inscribing it into this broader narrative of meaning making, where it's in conversation with what artists are doing at the kind of most sort of advanced or that these dialogues are happening at multiple registers at once. I think that's the only time I feel satisfied with like wearing the hat of curator, and I'm like you, really hesitant to include it as a title. I don't have an investment in it at all as kind of like I am a curator, and that's like how I would lead any conversation. It's kind of like I do that, I perform that activity or that role, and I do it as interestingly and as engaged as I can, while at the same time not having the kind of professional stake of the curator where I'm looking for another opportunity or something, and that gets into a whole other terrain where you're like you perform this role at an institution and then you go to a different institution, and like it is a sequence, and for me it's much more of a like embedded or embodied practice where like I live with the things that I like, or it's like I live with things that I decide to do because I'm gonna like be there afterwards for a long time and like live with those publics too. But I am interested in the ways that enters into something we'll get into later, like enters other dialogues and other conversations. Like, it's not very interesting when the curatorial role stops as an exhibition ends and you're kind of like, well, that happened, and then, like it didn't spark other things or other conversations.
Yeah. No, and that's largely outside of economics, because you only dovetail that as the reality of doing a job, outside of creating its own institution, where those kind of titles actually do become a factor, and how you're perceived professionally, and what your likelihood of being placed professionally somewhere. No, that's a huge point. I mean, I feel like, now, like, kind of the only way that I become comfortable with, to me, it's all about communication. And writing only takes you so far. Putting objects in space, putting objects on a wall, that's another form of communication. And, it is a different kind of process than being a writer in your room with your laptop and, being a voice, whatever. So anyway, so that's, why I was drawn to it. But I think the point that you bring up about economics and sort of like longevity and professionalization and stuff like that is like a really fair point to bring up as well. I don't know, should we maybe move on from tastemaking? Sure. Let's do it.
That leads to my section, I think. I mean,
I'm also just gonna smoke. What's going on here?
dramatically,
When the time we get to me, like that.
I mean, it's a little bit of a segue. I think, I could be wrong, but I think one of the reasons why the three of us specifically were invited is that we do have this hybrid, curator writer role, and that and this kind of conversation is described this idea of taste-making or gatekeeping, canon, and canonization, which is kind of where we're going for a minute, and how those different things. So I just wanted to like interject that so that we aren't comfortable with the curatorial. We do engage this like really differently, and I know that those two specific roles are like, I mean, I'm all about the sort of performance of the thing, of like it's taking on a mantle and then setting it down as being something that I specifically think about a lot in those things, and like, so they're really different practices, I guess is what I'm saying. So one question is based on understanding and experience, how is it that we determine what art is most compelling or important? And I think this was meant in a kind of like beyond taste, like maybe how we define something as like this is essential work.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, I wish I had like, I don't know if I have work, I need to think about the words to like, because I feel like for me it's very feeling based, you know, I respond very, like in a really like feeling way to work that I'm interested in showing, so, but obviously there are ideas and investments that back that up, so.
Yeah. But I think that to me, I lean back on the notion of the institutional rubric, kind of what is best for that space, what seems to be a successful practice or artwork within that given institution, and then what is the kind of exhibition that would function best in a certain environment or space. So that's a lot of, I guess, modes of mediation for what makes a successful artwork. But then if I take that kind of level of consideration off, I think about my role as a teacher. And that means that I'm looking at people's studios without any desire to necessarily put them in a show or an institution. So what does it mean then to advise someone on how to make better work? And that involves a lot of things. I mean, I think the first step, and that's also really shared with art criticism, is what is the project at hand? I don't necessarily think it's fair to apply the same kind of standards, obviously, across different projects. So if the given project is saying that it wants to be this, how successfully is it fulfilling that? And then maybe they're doing it really well, but then maybe you also know other modes or models or practitioners that are going to really push it to another level. So how do you point them to practice at this other higher level? And that's the whole goal, you know, is to really like, how can they be doing what they're doing at the best possible level? And sometimes actually shows function that way, especially when you're working at a more, a DIY experimental space. The show itself can function as that opportunity for artists to really push their practice. The simple like opportunity to be placed in a public setting and in context with other artists that they may or may not have perceived that their work as a dialogue with is a huge critical act in itself. So then it's like curation is criticism, you know. So it's like, oh, and then they're suddenly seeing their practice in a very different way, which is super exciting, you know. But yeah, but I think that, so there are a couple levels then, you know. I think artists who are working and are established really want to know, okay, how do I get into that space? How do I push my practice? So what do you want, you know, from a quote unquote artist, you know? Again, it's going to really differ. I think of it a lot as similar to indie publishing nowadays, with especially poetry presses. You know, you're not going to publish your work in any press. You're not going to send it out to any contest. You want to look at what that press is publishing, and then you're like, is my work in line with that? Do I even like it that they publish? And then you're going to submit your work to them because there's a higher likelihood they'll publish you. And I think that's very similar to art spaces. What are they showing? Who are the people? Like, what are they doing? Is your work in line with that? Then, in fact, you may succeed in being part of that, you know, sort of I went through several ones. My head was like sweet castle paradigm. It's stable, ultimately. Yeah, just like scroll of certain words, something like that.
No, I think you're right about like individual practices do need to be judged on their own merit. Like I think that is like really important, and like asking, you know, exactly as you said, like what is the goal like of this work, and is it, you know, okay? And once that's established, it's like how successfully is it achieving that? But you know, at least for me, it is also about, I guess I think about like voices in a conversation, and like, you know, I think of, I mean, you know, at least at this stage, you know, I do think of like the public that I'm curating for, we're curating for at Floodplain, like, you know, the publics are very St. Louis, you know, based, like, you know, or at least first and foremost. And so for us, it's about, you know, which voices are maybe absent from the broader kind of like visual conversation, if that makes sense. And like who, you know, who are we, you know, and why are they, you know, for what reason are they absent? Is that a good reason? Is it a bad reason? Does it have anything to do with the art they're making, or is there something else? Is there another factor? And if the art is strong and there are other factors, how can we sort of like, whether it's like the artist being maybe shy and like not wanting to push themselves or not knowing how, or if it's identity-based, whatever, it's like how can we sort of like step into a kind of, you know, as you say, encourage them and help them see like this could be a bigger thing than what it is.
Yeah.
So that's something about as well.
I think something that we all kind of enter with, and like just the recent show at Projects Plus that I think just came down maybe, like did a good job of doing something that I've always tried to do here as a curator as well, is just this kind of leveling of voices, of finding something like, is this work essential regardless of the context? And then like there are kind of canonical works that like you know generally is accepted as essential work or important work. And then where do you find moments to like take one from one place to the other, and like mix those registers, and we kind of like the nuances of that I think like getting back to this idea of like beyond just like context, like I think probably in our own ways will like go to bat for something specific.
Yeah.
Something like specific about the artist, about their practice, about something that maybe is halfway there but not all the way there, and through this relationship, maybe it like helps get it further towards where they are themselves kind of feeling. It's not just like outside, like I don't know, not like sort of screwed up power dynamic, but a really like nuanced relationship. Like what, like if you can see what they see for themselves in the work, and like really like realize that in a fuller, like more nuanced way. And I think that's where this idea of, at worst, like you see the kind of contemporary art world and the curatorial world as being like so lazy, really, because it's just like so easy to curate certain shows. Like I remember like really early on in our history when we had like the shittiest gallery and like no real like history. I remember just like inviting like Seth Price to like do a show, and like all these people, and I was like, that was actually a really lazy show. Like in retrospect, it was like, oh, I just went through like Eflux or Contemporary Art Daily, and you do a kind of like artist jumble, and you have an excellent exhibition. And it will, on certain ways, like work, but that's like not very interesting curatorial work at all. Like that's kind of the maybe like baseline of.
Because you're curating like names.
You're curating names. You're curating specifically like pre-selected, pre-approved names. And like there's a value in that, like not that we don't do that here in terms of like working with like artists that are known in like other kind of institutional contexts, but like it's really far more interesting to like pull that out of the work that.
And that's where the value of taste actually becomes more than just again that kind of autocratic, you know, urge. I actually think, that's a sense of nuance, the sense of someone's eye actually being honestly works. So, I mean, I'd say probably more of that would occur if more institutions had that ability to access that range. Does that make sense? I mean, I'd like to think that it was a successful exercise in creating a kind of relationship between the qualities of work. But who says there could be many more of those kind of conversations? But again, that goes into how hard it is to access multiple levels of work from the canon and place it together. So I don't feel any illusion that was.
But you did make, given that privilege and access, you world works when you like enter looking for like the name and like matching the name to the work as opposed to like feeling your way through the show and like what do you actually like respond to or feel like successful. And then in that, like I felt like some of the work from artists I knew was like more profound for me than like the names that I looked for on checklists. Like,
and that's such a beautiful opportunity too, because like, for people like us, of course we realize the value of some of those younger, locally based artists in what, in their work and what they're doing, and we see the beauty in it and the vision and the success. But, going back to this question of canons and taste, it's like there's also a very, and publics, right? Like there is a public out there that for them, like they're not going to take a younger artist who maybe they've never heard of, they're not going to take that person seriously until they see them hung next to a Cindy Sherman or, something.
That the work is holding its own.
Exactly. Or, precisely. Or it's even just that proximity, and that sort of cachet that comes with being shown with, a sort of like rock star or celebrity artist like that. And I think that it's a really beautiful thing to be able, to organize a show like that. So I just think it's spectacular.
Jump to another question we were kind of leading into, which I think this question is interesting and like really encourage people.
Weird.
I didn't know we had to say something else. Thank you so much.
So this question I've heard people talk about for a long time. I've been kind of operating in St. Louis more or less for 10 years. And this idea of like, is there a local regional canon? And I think I would connect that to like people back in their minds like, oh, it's the same artists get the like fellowships or the biennial, like Great Rivers biennial or whatever. So this idea of, is there a local regional canon, and then kind of a broader question is how does it connect to kind of broader national and international canons? And another entry point for me into that is this like idea of there are very few St. Louis artists who are a part of, or historically have been a part of the kind of broader art world canon. There's like really just like a handful of people that you could point to and say like they lived and worked their entire careers or most of their careers in St. Louis and like arrived there. So I'm curious about those two kind of very different canons. One is like the local regional, and then the second is the art world as we do.
Of course. I mean,
There's no one
always. And Joe Jones.
Oh, Joe Jones! Totally. I know. But I also only recently discovered him, honestly, through the availability of those works. Like, I mean, frankly, I did not know Joe Jones. And then I realized I reviewed his show for the RFT. That's right. Classic where you have to, like, you realize you review some things. This is a terrible admission that you just do research on the spot for Friday deadlines. That's something. Sorry, that's on tape.
For all the
Someone's watching that.
for the big Joe Jones.
We'll get rid of it, it's fine.
No, I really into Joe Jones now. I think at the time I was
He's
like,
awesome.
yeah, but I was really anti the show because the way it was pitched was a very kind of patriotic. I mean, he's a New Yorker. Yeah, so let's get off of that before I get stuck up. No, but I think it's a really But I think we may be on the cusp of an era that's creating the new entries to that canon. Given the number of just remarkable artists that have especially arose post-Ferguson, that I think has really galvanized an identity for St. Louis, and then also coincided with an era of economic feasibility for residing here, also in tandem with the internet era, where you occupy multiple sort of, identities. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, beyond that, a lot of the artists who originally been born here have gone on to notoriety or, join the canon who were in practice out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think that the internet has I think it's really interesting to think about what does the canon look like and mean in 2018.
I like how I'm weighing in on this, that will just do some weird, how we validate our authority here. Let me tell you about the JoJo.
This went flat about 15 minutes ago.
Such a moment of self-awareness.
But, I think that in 2018, the notion of a canon is and not to say that they don't still exist, but I do think that it is really different now. And I'm not even sure if we know, I'm speaking for myself, I for sure don't know what canonization means right now. And does it mean, I don't know. I guess there are some artists who are showing it, like MoMA, and who are active on that level.
MoMA is the canon.
MoMA is the canon. MoMA is for sure the canon. Right. We talk about canon creation, and that's still very powerful. So it's I guess if art history textbooks are still around in 20 years, and there's
Jansen, who taught here and has established all of our art collections. Another canon.
right,
Yeah. So then we have had our dirty little fingers in here in the Midwest. Yeah.
It's less the individuals who are in the canon than the canon itself.
Yeah. I totally believe in the canon though. That's also where I'm a fucked up person. But I love the idea of art expertise and great painters and exquisite sculpture and this sort of history of expertise. That I think a lot of those artists have been rightfully awarded for, but of course they obviously omitted massive narratives such as women. Or the Middle East. Just gaping exclusions that I think we are now trying to retrofit. But it's like it's red.
I just have a question. The idea of canon needs to be supported by lots of different things, right? So we have curators and institutions, but we have a lack of art criticism. So how can you really actually have a canon when you don't have somebody we keep talking about Clement Greenberg, but when we don't have somebody like that in a place like St. Louis that can actually argue that maybe some art isn't ready for prime time, or that show was shit, or not just cheerleading, over artists, and I think that's solely missing here. So how do we figure that out? Without that, we can't have a canon, really.
I think that's right. I think that, I was trying to think, and I don't know, maybe you all have a different take on this, but I'm what is the St. Louis, a local canon? Yes, there are, the artists who, are, because, you were talking about, the Great Rivers Biennial, and it's the people who get into the Great Rivers Biennial, are people who everyone, knows their name and, have shown, because that's, how the Great Rivers Biennial is, set up. You don't get, or most of the time, let's say 90% of the time, you don't get into the Great Rivers Biennial, you don't get selected for that, unless you have, been showing very actively, for an amount of time. So, it's yes, so that's the process, but I don't know that, winning the Great Rivers Biennial puts you in a canon. I mean, thinking of, I mean, probably at least half of the people who won the Great Rivers Biennial have immediately left St. Louis, like after winning. Or at least they did, like in the, the first few generations. That's probably different now, but at least in the beginning, that's mostly what happened. And so, to think about like a local canon besides Trova.
Tom Friedman.
Oh,
Yeah, sort of.
No, it's tough. I mean, I feel like there was a point at which I was obsessed with trying to solve this problem. I mean, there's this like kind of now non-circulating book that's like that high art in, I don't want to say it's called like Low Countries, that was written sometime in the early 2000s, late 90s, that was actually an anthropological study of the art community here in St. Louis that was sort of talking about the impossibility of its viability in a larger critical dialogue. There's like Peter Sheldell's famous comment about that, you can't really have an art critic in St. Louis because of its small scale. I mean, there have been so many ways in which the dialogue about regional art and regional criticality has been spoken about. But I think the part that's maybe most interesting at this point is that, okay, we're still asking the same question. Something doesn't work. Something doesn't work about the hardline critic who's a tastemaker. Again, you've been here with the Benettis. That was not a healthy hierarchy,
Right.
that was established through his tastemaking.
Right.
But then there's also something missing with his absence, which has made people erroneously nostalgic about him. So then, how do we support our community while at the same point, the same sort of gesture enforce a healthy criticality? I think it requires multiple voices. I think that was also the problem with the Benetti model. it's a single name model.
talk about the autocrat.
Yeah, I mean, we have issues obviously dealing with funding of arts journalism, especially in news dailies, not just specialty journals. I mean, but ostensibly we should be thinking, okay, we're in a different era now. These gaps should be filled by the blogs and the alternative journals, like Temporary and all that. And I actually feel like it still makes us, at least me, impulsively go back to like, man, Post-Dispatch, the Riverfront Times. Why don't we still have salaried critics? And not just one, two, or three, that are creating a multitude of, hardline judgments about the art, but that still creates a discourse amongst themselves. It's a hard thing. I don't know how to replace that model, honestly. Maybe you have better ideas because you're smarter. I feel like I'm still a little bit of a throwback. I don't know, we need crusty papers.
We'll all come back around.
That's what's wrong with my newspaper. I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
But it's creating issues.
I think these they're very different conversations, this idea of is there a local regional canon? And I think for a long time that's been kind of the fish in the barrel context in which people were fighting over non-existent prize a little bit. Where that was maybe St. Louis, I would say 5 years ago. It was this idea of we have a limited amount of resources, and those resources are grants or opportunities or exhibitions or the Great Rivers, and but they didn't actually enter you into a different canon. It was just we're fighting over the same resources or opportunities to, and notably the artists of the biennial moved or nothing really happened with their career in that sense. Not in every case, but it wasn't this thing that as people approach it with or any opportunity. Nothing was doing that clearly because we're Trova 50 years ago who in and out of relevance but was an important voice at a time, and like when you talk to like people at that moment, they were like, oh, Lallmeyer, that was Trova too, and like whatever. White flag in some way is a trickle down effect of Trova, for better or worse. Trickle down Trova.
Trickles down on its own.
Very specific time here. Post record, yeah.
But I mean, I think this moment you were referring to at the outset of this was like this idea that there is a moment right now in which people are entering these other dialogues in which like their career is not like capping out at like, okay, they've shown it this few spaces in town and like what now? And then you wait a few years and you do that like track again or something. And that's a much more interesting question, and it's like the idea of like canonization is that it's like collectively built up. It's like a consensus kind of model. Like it's not just like one moment or one opportunity or like, wow, that exhibition was like it, and they're like coasting off of that. It's like this kind of continuance of showing up, making amazing work, making relevant work for the moment. And I think that's specifically St. Louis's like book right now as artists like from St. Louis have an opportunity to enter into other narratives if they're making work that's relevant to the moment in a specific way, or several specific ways. And like it's interesting because yeah, it's this general. It's meeting like there is interest from outside of St. Louis on St. Louis, and then people kind of stepping in to provide something, and that's a different maybe answer to like what infrastructure is needed in St. Louis, because I think for the most part the infrastructure we have is as good as the infrastructure anywhere. It's just maybe not as dense. Like there's obviously like, you know, Berlin, New York, LA, London, whatever, you have a kind of critical density of exporting your work. You're amplifying your work outward, so like it's visible to people. And I think that like a certain amount of that has to happen. Like referring to like temporary was like really antagonistic in that way where we were kind of like, I'm actually not interested in the exporting. I'm interested in like, can we actually embrace these like local communities as interesting in themselves? And then through that, it maybe enters another thing, which is still like my interest at core, but I don't think it's most artists' interest, if that makes sense. Like I think that the kind of like market-based economy changes that. That we're looking for something career-wise that is not satisfied with the just like validation of being in an intensive community. And so that's like, I approach canonization with that, like what kind of environment do we want to like yeah, vibrate within, work within, be contending with. And a local community is usually not enough for most people in that intensive way, you know?
But I think you touched on something earlier about, I think speaking to larger issues, it just made me realize something that, I mean, I think is probably super obvious and it just really struck me now. It's like, I think what is happening with the artists we're producing now is that they're actually touching on something that is both highly specific, but nationally and internationally urgent. And that we had a lot of very, very strong artists working here for years in St. Louis. So there's always been in our community, enough so that we have this like bizarrely high per capita ratio between like high-end institutions like the Pulitzer in St. Louis and then Mildred Lane and like, you know, CAM and all of us in this tiny city. So there's always been a strong art community, but it's like the art community didn't have a message that actually, one, I think there was a lot of mimicry in terms of like the good art was mimicking what was good art elsewhere. So there was a sense that it was being rewarded for fulfilling standards that were nationally perceived. But now it's this like notion of like it's sui generis. It's actually speaking for an intrinsic issue that's emerging from the public, and that actually very unique to the character of our city.
I ever read that provincialism problem? It's this thing, I think it was early, like maybe 72 or something, written in like Western Australia, and it's still the best essay I've ever read, kind of describing the dynamics of a provincial, a self-defined provincial art community, which is essentially that, like, to the extent that it's responding to things happening elsewhere, it's always behind and seen as behind and sees itself as behind, and to the extent that it embraces this like unique local dynamic,
Yeah.
it sort of, and this was like in the age of the avant-garde, and it was specifically written around that, like the only avant-garde that's going to happen from Western Australia or from St. Louis is the like uniquely local and not in conversation with whatever is happening elsewhere.
But that's not necessarily the case. So no, it's a really good model in the sense that it's both actually in conversation with the national, but also uniquely kind of emerging from this culture. But that's a really good point. I mean, I think that is a really key shift for artists' viability at this point, which I think is both a hard lesson, but also possibly an important one to model. How do you obviously like authentically mold yourself to political motivations? You don't necessarily want to be engaging in like, empty. Yeah, like empty. Well, no, I don't. I'm not gonna demonize the initials actually. Like empty virtue signaling, essentially. For the sake of more broad viability. But I think at the same time, like asking your own work and practice how it can perform on a deeper level is a very productive question. That would happen in any LFA program. See, this happened to me last time. I do have these bathrooms so bad. I just have like an acorn size.
So while Jessica does
Yes.
it's good. We're running out of time anyway. So while Jessica does that, does anyone have a specific question that they'd like to ask Liz or James in the meantime? Anybody?
Well, James, you were comparing St. Louis to other cities and the opportunities for artists. Do you feel like there are the same opportunities for artists to show and get grants and to make new work here in St. Louis as peer cities? Or can we be doing better?
Short answer is yes, I actually do think so, and more than a lot of cities. I don't think that is the holdup, is the kind of infrastructure. So I was going to talk about terrariums and do it. This idea of like an ecosystem being like a terrarium that you can like organize all the component parts and it work. And I think that it's like much more like a weather system, and this idea of it's like totally unpredictable and chaotic. And I think that St. Louis has most of the things that it needs right now to be vibrant. I think that it is vibrant in most cases. There are like, I could give specific things that like XYZ would be better, and like they're, like more interesting, risk-taking commercial galleries would make artists happy because like market is important and like making money is important and whatever, and like more, I've always said this sort of like St. Louis needs more sort of the artist-run, artist-centric. Like there's actually been a hesitance to like do this sort of self-organized, and like I think all three of us have been part of that, and like it's really important, and a lot of people do, but like, right now there are so few places that for artists to show. Like there are like limitations.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
there are
enough
absolutely.
places to show, are there enough?
And
And compared to Kansas City, like, I don't have numbers, like I can't give it statistics, but I feel like we even have like half the numbers. I mean, and I know that Kansas City is the artist, whatever, but like, we have like several, like, if you put together like the art programs here, like, you have the same sort of like center of gravity that you would with the KC artists.
Well, they're different. I mean, I know that Casey has a lot of envy towards St. Louis because we have a master's program, several master's programs actually that contribute to our art scene. So a lot of what they do in terms of space making in Casey is, of course, and and then they leave. So I think there is a different quality to what we have, and also our programs tend to be much more conceptually based because they're not out of conservatories. I mean, so they have this amazing ability to produce artists who are craftsmen that are extraordinary, coming out of PCAI. But we have programs that emphasize writing 40-page theses that are based in, research-based institutions. Almost all of them actually are in universities as opposed to conservatories. So it's this funny thing how everyone's always eyeing the other. But I have no idea what the original question was. Throw this out there. Some data for you guys to go around with.
Yeah. So to round that all out, where do you think we need to go critically? You can make that personal if you want, or
I like how you make it personal.
Yeah.
Might get better. I don't know. Then I just suddenly got really dark. Okay, let's go to the next one. Yeah, sorry. I guess something like really deep.
I mean, James, when you wrote for Art America about artists working in single state, but do you feel like that was an exercise of canon formation, or was it viewed that way by people here?
For me, it was absolutely that.
Exercise in what? I didn't know.
Canon formation.
Canon formation.
I would say that in that initial piece, I wanted to say a lot of specific names of people who mattered in this place and had before. And it wasn't just like this moment. And so there was a conscious canonization happening for sure in that piece. And for me, I think there was also a vocalization of something that I felt was like should have. I think for a lot of St. Louisans was like totally assumed, and it was like not widely known. It was this like idea that so many moments of importance to history and art history have happened here, and that we don't give ourselves enough credit for that. And like in St. Louis, like it's actually like so. Ferguson or uprising for the city at large, and like city government, all this is a thing to like squash as quickly as possible and move on and pretend like it didn't happen. And so it was also this idea of like that best things about our city is kind of like written within that work, and it's clear to like to a lot of people here, and I think a lot of people in the room, and it's also clear to most people outside of St. Louis when they're like thinking about art here and artists here, and why they're looking at it, and why they're interested in the city is kind of like a new civil rights movement was born here. What happened then? Like how did that like enter art practice, and how did that enter work? And I think it totally like happened within studios, and then in a different way it happened within these like art adjacent things that are not necessarily like art practices that were also included. Like there's this place called Art House in North City, and it's like one of those was born out of like creating a physical like living space for Black and brown artists and activists, and like the fact that like that was right in the midst of everything. It's kind of like we need to be thinking about how do we live, like how do we live better and live differently, and like that's the part where I would like to see more experimentation. So like it was canonization, and it was a little bit of a like push to like for people to like embrace that and do it further, kind of at the same time. Yeah.
Right, so I'm going to call it. Anyone else have a question before? Okay, well, in that case, then I want to thank James, Liz, and Jessica for joining us today. Can we get and obviously the Luminary and the Critical Mass board for whom we have today beer. So.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, thank you so much, Joe. Absolutely. And I never got to my smokable roll of questions.
What was the last one?
Oh, yeah. One thing.
That was the last question.
What was you want to ask the last question? So,
It's pretty big.
Have you guys nothing?
yes.
I know, this is a dangler here. How to raise class and gender factor into local taste making, and how and why do our efforts address these factors? Succeed or fail. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. Just a whole other.
That's the next channel.
I do too. I think we can keep chatting, but,
Number off, 1, 2.
not to keep you hostage. into the stormy night.
Yeah, it is. So, also, we have a critics email show is now at
The Sheldon. For the rest of until August 1st. So
Until
please,
August
if you haven't been to Sheldon, stop by the Sheldon and see the great work of our critics and illustrators.
When is the artist?
Oh, the art stock is June 26th. Yeah, so we're going to be having an art talk. Well, I'm sure you'll be seeing information about it on all of our